This video contains spoilers for the entire Xenoblade series. Viewer discretion is advised. In 2022, I spent the summer playing through Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I completed the game within a month. I loved it so much for a bunch of different reasons. The game fixed the flaws of the first two titles while building on the solid foundation they made. The gameplay was perfect. The world of Ionios was a joy to explore, and it's one of the most technically impressive Switch games ever made. It was a perfect title to cap off the core trilogy, and it is thanks to its incredible story and memorable characters, which are among the best RPGs in the genre. Back then, word about the new scenario story in the expansion pass was publicly known, but little else. Once Nintendo and Monolith revealed, then shadow dropped Future Redeemed in spring 2023, I was excited to play it, but I held out for a physical release. But given that hasn't happened, I'll address this later, I chose to finally play it just before Christmas last year. Another factor as to why I chose to play Future Redeemed now is because it's been largely forgotten about at this point, which is a shame but also understandable. 2023 was a fantastic year for video games, period. So it's easy to see why Future Redeemed got overlooked among the many other incredible games put out. However, other factors like the large barrier to entry and the lack of physical release also played a role. The thing is, I didn't initially plan to make a video on Future Redeemed. That was before I played it. I was blown away in so many ways. Future Redeemed is a game that thrusts a lot of information towards the player and prompts you to dwell on it long after you complete the game. That led me looking up other people's thoughts and videos on Xenoblade 3, Future Redeemed, and all the other titles, as there were many things I'd previously overlooked and wasn't aware of. This is especially relating to how it connects to other titles in the wider Xeno universe. This kind of thing is something I rarely do and is up there with the likes of Persona 4 and White Album 2, which are some of my favourite games of all time. This video is going to be a bit different to my other review retrospective videos, as it's not really a full review. If you're watching this, I'm assuming you've already completed it or you don't intend to ever play it and love spoilers. Many of the thoughts I'm going to share don't relate really to the gameplay, but rather to everything else around the gameplay. So that said, let's get straight into it. I'm starting by touching on the Cent-Omnia region, the part of Ionios that is in the middle of the world but was destroyed long before the main game. This entire area feels like a huge love letter to Xenoblade 1 above everything else, given how most of the locations in this area are taken from that game. This ranges from Gower Plain that you encounter towards the start, right the way through to Ragwell Lake. It was kind of like visiting an old friend, and I imagine it was even more enjoyable for those who played the first Xenoblade properly back on the Wii. It was also cool seeing for all the references to other regions, especially from Xenoblade 2 in the background for the world map. The distinctive titans you see were already destroyed by the time the main game's events occurred, due to annihilation events. It feels different yet familiar, and it makes panning the camera around to look for references a lot of fun, and I recommend taking a look for yourself. Even Colony 9 was taken directly from Xenoblade 1, and it was really nice to revisit it. It felt really homely in a way to walk around this essentially reused area, aside from all the moss, and now everyone's outside and camping because of how unsafe the buildings are, even though apparently Fiora's old home is perfectly fine because references and nostalgia, I suppose. If I had to make a criticism though, I would have liked to see more references to Xenoblade 2 in the Cent-Omnia region that are a bit more explicit. For example, the Cliffs of Moritha are by Colony 9, but unless you check the wiki and spoil yourself, you will probably miss that when you're playing, especially if you've not played Xenoblade 2 for a while. Any niggles I have with the Cent-Omnia region itself are easily countered by Black Mountain. One of my niggles with Xenoblade 3's world is that the snow area of the game, Capricorn Peak, is tiny. As nice as it was, I felt that it was lacking something. It lacked the grand scope of both Valak Mountain and the Tantalese Titan that I loved about both those worlds in the previous games. It didn't help that Capricorn Peak is the last area you visit in Xenoblade 3 that's physically part of Ionios, rather part of quote-unquote Upper Aetia. Then along comes Black Mountain. Not only does Black Mountain combine both Valak Mountain and the Kingdom of Tantal into one area, but it also combines one of the most iconic locations of Xenoblade 1. Prison Island. Choosing Prison Island is so poetic because how you access the final dungeon of Xenoblade 1 from Prison Island in that game, you also do the same in Future Redeemed. You can teleport to the final boss of Future Redeemed from the top of Prison Island, which was also so much fun to ascend, and I love that so much. And even outside of Prison Island, the atmosphere is extremely intimidating and dangerous, more so than any other area in Ionios, and that's in the best possible way. It's a world that has a unique badass atmosphere in its own right and is greatly helped by the amazing soundtrack. Black Mountain is among the best snow areas in the series, and more than makes up for the small Capricorn Peak. One of the other strengths of Future Redeemed is the characters, which I do want to touch on a bit. I'm going to start with Matthew, who is the main protagonist. I love him as a character. He's quite simple and to the point, very much the opposite of an actual British person in real life. Then there is the mysterious A, who's closer to Alvis from Xenoblade 1 than the actual Alvis, and the actual genuine ally of the remaining Alvises. I think she's a great character, both developed throughout the game, and especially Matthew, who I'll return to later. I also think it was really cute seeing both Nicole and Glimmer interact and befriend each other, essentially becoming allies from enemies. They essentially echo both Shulk and Rex, as well as Noah and Mio, and it felt so weird encountering them from a perspective similar to Vandam from the base game. It was an interesting alternative perspective. Additionally, seeing Shulk and Rex taking on parental roles for their children, although not explicitly said in Glimmer's case, is very wholesome, and I'd love to see more of it. Finally, there is Niall. Niall is Matthew's sister, who Matthew was looking for throughout the game. Due to Alpha possessing her, she serves as both a protagonist and an antagonist at the same time. She needs rescuing, but she's not a damsel in distress. She's kind and compassionate, but also fantastic in a fight. And a little side note, I like how this game did a huge bait and switch in the marketing. I noticed in the promotional imagery that Niall is credited as the 7th party member, but she doesn't actually join your party until the final boss. You can't actually have her in your party elsewhere on your first playthrough at all. Nice little details there to obscure plot spoilers. I like it a lot. These kinds of restrictions are not consistent. For example, the scene when you fight that massive double Mobius and first get Shulk into a party. I died and was able to take Shulk to the other side of the Gower Plain map, which was interesting, so the game was basically kind of broken in that regard, which I thought was pretty cool. So yeah, that's a massive tangent there. I also want to touch on the two main villains in the game, Alpha and Mobius N. As for Alpha, formerly known as Alvis, having him return at all with his original voice actor is an absolutely incredible thing to experience, and this is before having to fight him. He's not the same character as he was in Xenoblade 1. He's broken, empty, and malicious. He's just a computer, devoid of all kindness. Then of course, there's Mobius N, and his character was a real treat. He's kind of comparable to Jin from Xenoblade 2 because you see a side of him that you don't see in the main game, and even genuinely does some good deeds in there, which is a huge contrast to the main game. And also, because N is technically Noah, you technically fight Alpha, the true antagonist of the Xenoblade saga, with all three protagonists of the main games, which I think is genuinely incredible. Then we get to the whole series of cutscenes you get following the fight with Mobius N. At the end of this scene, everyone gets beamed into Origin and the surreal weirdness starts. Now I knew that there'd be some kind of big twist, and I already knew about some of the connections to Xenosaga that are all but directly confirmed at the end of the game. But what this form would take, I wasn't sure. I also want to state that I haven't played Xenosaga at the time of this video, so some of my initial thoughts were a bit off the mark. The first part of this whole scene is being beamed into an American-esque suburban estate, which is extremely weird. When you think of Xenoblade, you do not think of the American dream, even though they are both equally fantasy. I first thought this scene was where the Xenosaga connections start, and in retrospect I'm kind of right, although I think this was meant to be where the Land of Morpha pre-experimental form, otherwise known as the Radamanthus Authority, is explicitly confirmed to the player, which Shulk and Rex do. I don't think anything else was meant to be explicitly spelt out at this point. What I did not expect at all though was the scene after this, which is known as the radio scene. This is one of the most surreal scenes I have ever experienced in media, like ever. This scene tells two stories in one. The first is a heart-to-heart between Matthew and Niall, who finally reunite after the events at Raguel Lake. However, Matthew has to talk out of believing Alpha's drivel, so it's not exactly a happy conversation. It's surprisingly tense, when heart-to-hearts are the kind of scene you normally associate with quieter, more intimate moments in the game. However, the second story this scene tells is what creates the juxtaposition, which I'm sure you already know what it is, but I'm just going to make it clear. Throughout the conversation, the radio dumps lore about the Xeno universe, directly referencing Xenosaga and Xenoblade Chronicles X, while referencing Xenogears as much as legally possible. The actual content of this broadcast is much more serious than the conversation it plays alongside. And at first it seems inappropriate, but on reflection it actually makes perfect sense. And it's not just relating to the game itself. After all, if you're in the real world you can tune into radios at any time, When you're broadcasting or replaying videos or games, whether it be online, in person, or via any other medium, you don't know what is happening in the area where a radio is playing. In Future Redeemed, this radio is playing during this heart-to-heart scene. Critically, the broadcast ironically supports Matthew's pleas to Niall to listen to him and not fall for Alpha's false narratives, given that what the world looks like then is what Klaus, the creator of Alpha, ruined. This subtlety of detail is really impressive and is something that's really easily overlooked. This whole scene is so overwhelming and hard to grasp at the time that you need to think about it later to properly understand it. Nintendo and Monolith themselves even knew this scene was overwhelming and hard to follow, hence why there are subtitles for the radio broadcast on top of the conversation between Matthew and Niall. Last time I can think of that had multiple subtitles like this playing at once was actually the White Album 2 fan translation, where the Hojo Station radio broadcast plays over the start of the game with custom subs that were actually hard-coded into the translation by the fan translation group. And even when the cutscenes when you first meet Haruki in closing chapter, as well as Chiaki, one of the side heroines, their conversation, which is actually a lot more mundane. It's the same kind of plot device, and it's really interesting to see the tone being set for White Album 2 in a different way, but using the same core idea of having a radio, which I think is really cool as well, and it goes to show how you can use it in different contexts. Regardless of the game though, thanks to the internet, it's a lot easier to process scenes like this, and in the case of Future Redeemed's radio scene, it's one of the most impressive scenes I've ever seen in a video game. Then of course, there's the ending. After you defeat Alpha, Shulk, Rex and N must sacrifice themselves to keep Origin alive and hope for the future. The core theme is passing the torch, and this scene was so effectively done. It was both heartbreaking and overwhelming, as although these fan favourite protagonists, if you consider a fan favourite protagonist, leave the world of Ionios, they affirm that it's not forever. And it's literally not, it's a literal core theme of Xenoblade 3 as well as Future Redeemed. I also thought it was nice seeing Matthew and N entering some kind of truce. Sure, they never agree with each other at all ideologically, but as some form of respect to each other for taking down an even more powerful entity, silently agree to no longer fight each other and go their separate ways. Now to move a bit on to discussing what I see the future might be of Xenoblade in general and maybe Monolith. I'm first going to mention with regards to the post-credit scene, I'm one of those people who wondered what the hell that was about, seeing the star falling to Earth. So I had to do some research and engage with what others have said, including spoiling myself on some Xenosaga information, which I'll hopefully forget about, in order to form my own conclusions. So I do believe the next Xeno title will ultimately be a continuation of both Xenoblade and Xenosaga 1 to 3. As to what form, I don't know. However, there's lots of potential. Even with the core Xenosaga story, I believe is almost certainly getting a remaster, given the Batten Kaitos 1 and 2 HD remaster collection came out last September, which might have actually been to test the waters for a Xenosaga remaster and get the process in place for two comparatively more niche games. As for potential lore, as Klaus's experiment has now been reversed completely, that means, in theory, any character from Xenoblade 1 and 2 who was alive after those games concluded, alongside some of the new characters in Xenoblade 3, can reappear in future titles. And any issues with character development, specifically Nicole and Glimmer, which some people believe didn't get enough character development, can be resolved in future games. On the one hand, I can see how this might be seen as anticlimactic because there's this, oh here's this massive 1000 year plus tangent on a timeline because it's all good now, it's been fixed. However, I don't think that's the case. It really does depend on where the game goes from here. At the time of this video, I haven't played Xenosaga yet, so I cannot comment on the Xenosaga characters, but I think it might be possible for some of those characters to return too, especially Cosmos, who does appear in the ending of Future Redeemed in that blue star. As I've played the Project Cross Zone games, I am familiar with Cosmos and Telos and a couple of areas from the Xenosaga universe. I think it might be interesting to see both of them return, assuming that's even possible outside of optional gacha mechanics. There are two other franchise-related things I want to briefly touch on. The first is a lack of a physical release for Future Redeemed. After playing this game, I understand more why Nintendo are hesitant to release a standalone physical version of Future Redeemed for some people if they bought this as a standalone physical in stores, even if it clearly says you must play all other Xenoblade games before playing this first on the box. I do still believe Future Redeemed absolutely needs one at some point. After all, it did complete the series. Not releasing a physical at launch makes sense now, given all the spoilers. The last minute shadow drop likely made it easier for Nintendo to plan this marketing strategy accordingly. Will a belated physical release happen? I think it will. What form this physical will take is unclear. I think it's most likely to be a game plus DLC expansion pack bundle, like Nintendo published in Japan for Zelda Breath of the Wild, Splatoon 2 and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. The reason is due to what data miners found within Future Redeemed's code. For those who don't know, when Niall discovers an Ontos core on Corn Island in the Cadencia region, the models for this scene load from the base game Xenoblade 3 files, and not from the Future Redeemed portion. This would need to be reprogrammed for a standalone physical release, and Monolith Soft may not have the time or resources to do this. Regardless of whether Future Redeemed gets a physical release, it's a truly incredible experience, and I encourage anyone who has enjoyed the Xenoblade series to check it out, even if you avoid expansion passes and digital only releases. I wanted to wrap up this video with something I think many people overlook regarding Future Redeemed. At its core, this game is Matthew's story. It's a story about an escapee from a city that was burnt to ashes, looking for fellow survivors, including his sister. It's a story about a guy passionately looking for a way to stop the endless now ideology that plagues the world of Ionios. It's a story about a guy doing whatever it takes to save those he loves from a being that few people will ever comprehend. It was easy for Matthew to play a minor role in practice despite being the main protagonist on paper. Shulk and Rex returning would have taken centre stage. Instead, they exist to drive the overall story and play a supporting role in Matthew's overall goals. Alpha and Mobius End's agendas also overlap with Matthew's, meaning his agenda becomes the focus. The ramifications for the Xeno series as exposed in Future Redeemed could also have taken centre stage. Instead, there's something that longtime fans will love, while newcomers who've only played the Xenoblade games won't mind, as they're only a small part of the overall experience. Additionally, the role of this game being a prequel to Xenoblade 3 could also have taken centre stage too, and while you know it's a prequel, this also doesn't take centre stage. Matthew does. In the last scene of Future Redeemed, Matthew leaves behind the new city, now based at Swordmarch, to find more survivors, and this is a great example. It's a callback to his character while celebrating the past and future that awaits the city, Ionios, the wider Xeno series, and Monolith Soft. Passing the torch, so to speak, which I think sums it up perfectly. Hello, and thanks for making it to the end of my Future Redeemed video. This was a very experimental video for me, as this is the first time I've dove into really spoiler heavy content, which I've wanted to do for a while but only finally got around to doing with this game. Additionally, I'm moving to new so you may have noticed some changes compared to previous videos. While this video took much longer to make than I expected it to, it's turned out extremely well and I love it to bits, and I hope you do too. I'd love to do more videos like this, so please let me know your thoughts. What would you like to see in the Xenoblade series next? Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, that's all for today. Please like, comment, subscribe, algorithm boosting stuff, and also consider becoming a channel member if you're able to. Thank you so much. Bye bye.